guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Muriel and I'm a food photographer and recipe developer. And on this channel, I talk all about food photography, vegan recipes, and personal growth. In today's video, we're continuing the series where I look at old photos that I've taken in the past and I talk about their positives and their negatives, and I share with you some of the tips and tricks that I could have used in the past to improve those photos so that you can do the same with photos that you're taking today. If you haven't watched part 1 of this series, make sure to check it out. I'm gonna link it below in the description. And if you have, well, welcome back. I'm happy to see you again. So let's jump right in and look at 3 new photos. The first photo is this berry waffle. The second one is this golden milk latte. And the third one is this black sesame smoothie. Let's start with this one since that's the one that we stopped on. I really like this photo actually. I love the simplicity of it. First of all, I like the fact that the line in the back is actually very straight. Being a perfectionist in terms of lines in life, this is very visually appealing to me. Another thing that I really like about this photo is actually the contrast in it. I love how strong the shadows are here on this side and how bright this part is. I love the shadow that was created here at the bottom as well. Because this image is not very colorful, I like the fact that the shadows are so harsh because it adds that dramatic effect that I actually really like. And I remember at this time, I was really not into moody photography that much. It was something that really scared me, and I remember when shooting this, I was actually so excited about it. Another thing that I personally really like in this photo is the very delicate garnishes on the top of this smoothie. I think I used some chia seeds and black sesames in this case, and I just find they're perfectly in focus. They look really good, and look how sharp this focus is. I also really like this spoon. If you've watched the part 1 of this video series, I actually used this spoon in my soup photo, and that was not too successful. But in this case, I find it looks really good. I like the fact that the spoon is actually brown. It adds kind of a warmer tone to the overall image and makes it look really good. I also love the shape of the spoon here, how there's kind of this curve. I just find it looks perfect here and it's a perfect choice. Again, in terms of natural feel, I like the fact that there's sesame seeds here that are being sprinkled in the back. They're kind of blurry, they're not really sharp. Looks really nice. The first thing that I would say this photo should improve on would be the plastic straws. Not just because they're plastic straws, but also because of the fact that they have some color in them. Because the image tone is a little bit more warm rather than cool, I just find that the blue is a little bit distracting. I find in this case, reusable metal straws would have looked really good because they would have kind of absorbed the warm tones of the image while still remaining kind of neutral. Another thing that I would personally improve in this photo would be to add a little bit of a sharpness in this little detail of the bottle. Like a lot of my pictures, I must have shot this photo in a shallow depth of field because of the fact that, you can tell the back is a little bit blurry. But what this did is that it kind of focused the detail on the black sesames at the top, which looked good, but I find this part could be a little bit more sharp and it would have looked a little bit better. Apart from that, I think these are the only 2 main things that I would change in this photo. I actually still really like this image. Although today I tend to shoot with cooler tones, I think in this case is a perfect example that warm tones in food photography can actually look really nice. Now let's jump to this image of this golden milk latte. I remember this was again one of those times where I kind of experimented with moody photography. This was taken over 2 years ago, I think, and I was pretty happy with this photo. One of the things that I find is super successful here in this case is the fact that there is a gradient of light. So what I'm trying to say here is that see how the backdrop is really dark, it's almost black, and then the little scarf that I used here is not as dark as the backdrop, but it's still much darker than the golden milk itself. So there's kind of this layering of dark to light, which I find looks really nice and adds a lot of depth. In this case, the golden milk is the subject of our image and is also the element that is the closest to the camera, while also being the brightest element in the photo. And the element under that, which is the scarf, is a little bit darker, adding a little bit of depth to the perspective. And then the very last thing, the backdrop, is the darkest element of this photo. I find it looks really, really good. And it's something I remember at that time, I didn't really understand those type of concepts. But now looking back at this image, I can see that is why this photo looks good. Another thing that I like in this photo is the fact that there's a couple of elements that kind of indicate the ingredients that are in the golden milk. Like, for example, there's some cinnamon in the golden milk and there's some cayenne pepper. In terms of things that this photo could improve on, I would say is, number one, maybe adding a little more spices in that spoon. I just find the spoon looks a little bit empty and it doesn't look as good because of that. Another thing could be to maybe add more whole spices. For example, in this case, I could have had more cinnamon sticks here because I just find that 2 doesn't look as good as 3 or 5. Again, odd numbers tend to look better than even numbers. This is not like this rule that is completely unbreakable, but generally speaking, in food photography or in photography in general, sticking with odd numbers rather than even numbers is one of those tips and tricks that you can use to just make your photos look overall more visually appealing. So yeah, I could have added maybe some star anise or some whole nutmeg, something like that, just to add a little bit more visual interest in this photo. Another thing that I would kind of change in this photo would be this sift. I find it's just a little bit too big. Its diameter is almost as big as the cup itself. So I find it's kind of competing with the attention, although the cup is definitely much brighter, much more colorful. Because this sift is so big and takes so much space in the photo, I find it's not as visually appealing. If I would have just moved it a little bit upwards and cut it kind of in half, I think the image would be overall a lot more balanced. And I think that's it for this image. I think those are my main comments and the things that I would improve on. So let's jump to the final image. These waffles. It's funny because when I first saw this image, I was like, wow, this is actually really nice. I find it looks really good. And although I do, when I started analyzing this photo, I just realized that with a little bit of extra work and a couple of tweaks here and there, I could have made this photo even better. In terms of the positives, of course, this waffle looks really good. I mean, I would have this any weekend or any weekday for the matter. I love the fact that there's the berries on this waffle, the fact that there's walnuts, the fact that there's hemp hearts. It looks very natural and appealing. Another thing that I really like in terms of the berries is the fact that the berries look very fresh. I must have washed them right before putting them on the waffle, but they look very juicy and fresh and healthy and delicious. And that's something that's super positive. In terms of other positives of this image, I like the fact that the main subject is still one of the brightest elements of the photo. You know, it's closer to the light in this case, as opposed to, you know, the elements that are more in the back. In the back, there's a little bit of darkness here, which kind of, again, attracts the attention more on the main subject that is in the foreground. I like the fact that in this photo, it wasn't all about just the one single plate of waffles. It was about kind of creating this atmosphere and ambiance and this like natural setting, right? Like with the other stack of waffles in the back, with the coffee, it's very inviting and it looks really good. Now, let's jump to the things that I would improve on. First thing is that the fact that the main waffle, which is our main subject, is a waffle that is not perfectly formed. What I mean by that is how the batter kind of created these harsher edges compared to these waffles that are more rounder and fuller. When you choose your main subject, try to go with the one that looks the best. I find, although this does look good, because there is like an element of comparison with the other waffles being right there and being more round and perfect, I just find it doesn't look as good. So I would have just switched out this main waffle with one that's from the stack, because if the waffles in the secondary stack are not as perfect, it's fine because they're not the main element anyways. Another thing that I would have changed is, in this case, I am not a fan of how the utensils are placed. Although it looks natural in the sense that they're like stacked one on top of the other, the fact that the fork here is kind of being hidden by the plate, I don't love that. I find it just cuts it off and looks a little bit awkward. So I would have just pushed the fork a little bit down so that you can see the entire fork. Another thing that I would have done is maybe choose utensils that have a little bit more character, something with a little bit of more detail, or utensils that are more matte to add an artistic edge to the image. One last thing that I would do in this photo to make it look a little bit better is to add a reflector to reflect a little bit of the light here on these berries. As you can see on the photo here, this part of the waffle is very light. That's where the light is coming from, right? And this part is further away from the light, therefore it's darker. By adding a reflector on this side, it would have bounced the light back onto the scene right here, making this a little bit more appealing. And because the berries and the garnishes are one of the things that really make this photo look beautiful, I find by adding that reflector, it would even bring out more of the details of the berries and, you know, like the hemp seeds that have fallen in the little cracks and stuff like that. So that would be, I think, the last thing that I would change in this photo. So that is it, you guys. I hope this video was helpful and that you learned some new tips and tricks that you can use in your own food photography to make your photos more beautiful and more memorable. And also, I hope that this video and this series in general is helping you to train your eye to notice certain things in food photography and just in photography in general. And if that's the case, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, write your comments in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts about this series and this video in general. And also make sure to share this video if you think that people in your community can find it interesting. And last but not least, subscribe. And on that note, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you very, very soon.